346, chapters 23 and 24. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 346. Yes, now. And yes. As soon as you're done listening today, you can go watch part 2 of the Richard Armitage Show, otherwise known as the 4-part miniseries of North and South that you can get on Netflix and stream. It's today's chapters that we have had to wait for. And we've also had to wait for today's chapters before I could play some more Larry audio. So I will have a bit of Larry audio for you at the end of today's episode as well. And actually, it just occurred to me, some of you may not know who Larry is. Larry Effelman is a friend of mine by way of an old theater friend, Jonathan. His father is a professor of Victorian literature, now emeritus, and has been gracious enough to get on the phone with me a couple of times now to discuss Victorian literature and things that were going on at the time. And we started these conversations back when we did Jane Eyre. And it was in that conversation that Larry actually pimped Elizabeth Gaskell. And I fell in love. And so that is why you are listening to North and South. But it's also one of the enormous benefits of having things like Skype that I can record from, because Larry lives hours and hours away from me. And yet he can be here with us when we've passed the point of spoiler alerts. So I've had to wait. And that's who Larry is. And that's why we're going to hear a little bit more from him today. I have found Larry to be so much fun to talk to because he knows so much about this entire time period. And you can tell how much he really loves this book especially, and how much, honestly, he really loves Margaret. I have wondered if his wife worries. But it's just so much fun to talk to him, and I'm so excited to be able to share this audio that I've been sitting on for so long with you later in the episode. But first, in all the moving and the chaos and the crazy and the nuttiness, I lost track of a letter that I got way back at the beginning of May when I had made a crack about Mr. Hale and his speaking ability, I guess, about how he probably wasn't the most stirring speaker ever, and yet he was going to the Lyceum, and all of these factory workers were going and listening to him, and Kristen, longtime listener Kristen, wrote in and said, "Ecclesiastical architecture isn't that bad a topic." And she wrote, "A good speaker could make European cathedrals fascinating. And these are all the things you see every day. What do they mean? Why was it so important?" And she's absolutely right, because I used to have, I think I still have, I hope I still have, oh my goodness, David Macaulay's books. If you've never seen these, they are worth hunting down. In fact, I will try and find links so that you can pick these up. If you have kids, these are the kind of books that on a Sunday afternoon when they're bored and they have nothing to do, just hand one of these books like Underground or Pyramid or Castle or Cathedral to them and watch what happens as they thumb through these books. Because Kristen is absolutely right. Ecclesiastical architecture is fascinating. And she goes on to write, "So for instance, this summer I was touring Zurich and I visited the church where Zwingli preached and launched the Swiss Reformation." I hope I pronounced that guy's name right. This is not Martin Luther. This is the Swiss Reformation. "His pulpit, which is no longer there, things do need to get replaced after a while, was built from wood reclaimed from hacked up Catholic altars." Whoa. And whoa. And she said, "Well, now, that's making a point. And I would say, yes. And perhaps don't mess with the Swiss Reformation is the corollary to that. Then she wrote, for a group that comes together to hear interesting lectures about all sorts of different things, I could totally imagine ecclesiastical architecture being among them. And then she finishes with, now, Mr. Hale probably isn't that speaker, but I don't think the fault is in the topic. And I couldn't agree with Kristen more. That just cracked me up. And she was absolutely right to correct me on that one. And actually, I would like to invite responses from some of you. I have 2 questions. Number 1, you know that I have a rather dramatic younger son, and said son has been complaining that he has a pain in his back, and it's a weird place. Like, I've checked, it's not his kidney, it's up, it's kind of between the lower edge of his left shoulder blade and his spine. So it's in a weird place where like the deltoids and the traps and all of that stuff are kind of coming in. But as far as I know, there is no insertion point in that space right between the shoulder blade and the spine. And he's been saying that it hurts, and it hurts when he jumps, and it hurts when he runs, and it hurts when he lies down. But if he lies down on his stomach with his arms underneath him, kind of like a modified cobra, where he's not all the way up with his arms straight, he's actually kind of on his elbows and forearms, he says that doesn't hurt at all, which I found really confounding. So at first I'd been thinking, well, geez, this kid is growing so fast, it's probably just a growing pain. I remember growing pains, but those were in my legs. You know, I grew 6 inches in 1 year in 6th grade, and I remember how much that hurt. So I can't figure out what this could be. Have you guys ever experienced pain there yourselves? I mean, I was licensed as a massage therapist a long time ago. I know anatomy pretty well, and I cannot for the life of me figure out what it could be. And of course, there's the other side of it, which is this just him trying to get out of PE? I don't know. It's been going on for a while, and he's very specific about the location, and it is always the same location. So I hesitate to think that this is trauma, but I also don't know what it is. There's no bump, there's no bruise. I've had him do the lean forward thing so you can see if his spine is straight. I've run my fingers down both sides of his spine. There doesn't seem to be anything there. No knots, no lumps, no bruises, nothing. So it's a mystery. The second thing I wanted to ask you is more crafty in nature. We have, way back from when we got married, a cedar chest. And when we got this cedar chest, before it was shipped to us, we had an opportunity to choose what we wanted our front panel to be. It's a removable panel. You can slide it up and then lift it out. And then behind it is kind of a secret cubby hole where you could hang jewelry or necklaces, or there's little hooks for you to hang things on. So it's just kind of another hidey hole for stuff, which is great. But we didn't like any of the pre-designed panels. So for the last 17 years, or actually more, we got this before we got married. For the last 18 and a half years, we've had this blank beige panel on the front. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Now that I'm going to move into a place that actually has room where we can do our things, I should do something to this bloody panel. And I thought for a little while about working on toll painting or doing something like that, but I've tried that before, and I think I need a class. I'm really not very good at that. And then I thought, well, you could maybe do a collage kind of thing, and I don't know. And then it dawned on me, I could Zentangle. I could Zentangle on this panel, but, and this is where you come in, aside from the scary Mary mannequin that I shared with you at the beginning of North and South, I don't know that I've seen any Zentangles that are quite this epic. It's like, a 3.5 foot long, maybe foot high, roughly, panel. It's a lot of real estate to Zentangle with. So am I going to want to slit my wrists if I start this? And if I start this, is there any way that I can fake it? I was thinking about the way that Nanette had done those gorgeous, it was a sugar pot and I think a milk pitcher that I shared with you during Jane Eyre. When she did those, she had gotten letters, stick-on letters from Michaels or some craft store, and she had stuck those letters on and then outlined them with the Sharpie marker, and then did the Zentangling with the Sharpie marker, and then cooked them per the instructions that we had discussed those many moons ago. And so I was thinking, well, maybe if I got those stick-on letters and I kind of, put them on my clothes a little bit so that they weren't quite so sticky, because I don't want them to permanently adhere to this board, because I think it's just either cardboard or very thin particle board with kind of a semi-gloss paint job on top of it. And it's a substantial paint job, but still, I don't think it would be very hard for a very sticky stick-on letter to lift up a chunk of paint, which would be lousy and kind of defeat the purpose of making a pretty panel. So I was thinking maybe if I start in the middle, and I thought, well, I could do our names. I could do everybody in the family, and then Zentangle out from the center so that if I did give up, it wouldn't be quite so tragic. It would just look like I meant to have the design centered and all. But my question to you is this. Aside from, is this a ridiculous thing to do? The other question is, micron pens I tend to do better with. For some reason, I'm not as shaky with micron pens as I am with Sharpies. And that may just be because Sharpies to me scream permanent, and permanent is scary. Or it could be something about the pen itself or the nib, or I don't know what. But am I going to have to use Sharpie on a painted board like this? Or has anybody tried? Has anybody done this? Leave a comment in episode 346's show notes and share your genius with all of us, because I have to do something. Poor thing's been sitting there looking pathetic for a really long time. And now let's talk about a book. So North and South, I have not been saying a whole lot about the little poems that Elizabeth Gaskell puts at the top of each chapter. And part of the reason why I haven't is she didn't put those there in the original text when she wrote this in Dickens' Household Words magazine. So I kind of, doing that kind of poetry research is not pleasant for me and can sometimes be very time consuming. But this week, the very first poem clip that she does is from Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen. And I know some of you have read that. So if it jumps out at you, let me tell you, it is from book 4. And then it looks like it's broken down by chapter and line. So it'd be book 4, chapter 12, line 21, I think. So that's one thing I wanted to share with you. The next one is from a Scottish poet named William Fowler. And I'm reading this to you, and I bring this all up because of this one. His poetry was unpublished in his lifetime, but these lines that you will hear at the beginning of chapter 24 are from a sonnet called The Tarantula of Love. And I am not making that up. Isn't that awesome? He lived from 1560 to 1612 and evidently had a great sense of humor. The Tarantula of Love. A poem, a sonnet. And there is one other poem thing that is going to crop up in today's chapters. We will have a description of Margaret, about this, a look of calm descending on her face till it was, quote, stiller than chiseled marble, unquote. And it's actually quotationalized in the text. It has quotation marks around it. And that is because it is a line from Tennyson. The Tennyson poem it's from is called A Dream of Fair Women. This was written in 1833. And the complete citation is, at length I saw a lady within call, stiller than chiseled marble standing there, a daughter of the gods divinely tall, and most definitely fair. So I think we can all see why Miss Gaskell would have quoted that particular line, and probably would have expected the people who were reading the story, at least some of them, to know where that quote came from. Tennyson, popular. So, Margaret. When last we left Margaret, she had just gotten conked on the head I know Gaskell uses the word pebble. I found that so odd. I suppose she didn't want to use the word rock or stone because if it were a rock or a stone in the way that I think the connotation could be understood, that would imply that she would have gotten a concussion. And she doesn't seem to have gotten a concussion. She did get dinged and she did bleed and she probably has a bruise. But that was where we left her. And you may recall I had said at the end of last episode that I thought it was a little hard to tell whether Margaret was upset because she heard Mr. Thornton say that he loved her while she was dinged, or if it was because she heard Thornton's sister and the maid talking about her unabashed attention that she was giving Mr. Thornton by going and throwing her arms around his neck in order to save him from the mob. It's going to become quite clear in this chapter, the first chapter we listened to today, which one of those two things she was most upset about. Well, actually, which one she heard, to be honest. And then listen to her work herself up in our first chapter today, 23. It made me think of, there was a Woody Allen line saying that there are lots of things you can live without, but one of the things you cannot live without is a rationalization. You will make more rationalizations during the day than you will do anything else. And Margaret's rationalizations during chapter 23 are epic. So listen for that in 23, and then 24, I can't say a word about until afterwards. So without making you wait any longer, here's the follow-up to Margaret being so unbelievably brave and headstrong and forward-thinking and going down and rescuing a man from an angry mob. And oh, by the way, didn't you love Thornton just walking out into the middle of the crowd saying, okay, you want to kill me? Kill me. He's such a man. So here we go with the repercussions of Margaret's actions today in chapters 23 and 24 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 23. Mistakes. Which, when his mother saw, she in her mind was troubled sore, ne wist well what to ween. Spenser. Margaret had not been gone 5 minutes when Mr. Thornton came in, his face all aglow. "I could not come sooner. The superintendent would— Where is she?" He looked round the dining room, and then almost fiercely at his mother, who was quietly rearranging the disturbed furniture and did not instantly reply. "Where is Miss Ale?" asked he again. "Gone home," said she, rather shortly. "Gone home?" "Yes, she was a great deal better. Indeed, I don't believe it was so very much of a hurt, only some people faint at the least thing." "I'm sorry she has gone home," said he, walking uneasily about. "She could not have been fit for it." "She said she was, and Mr. Lowe said she was. I went for him myself." "Thank you, mother." He stopped and partly held out his hand to give her a grateful shake, but she did not notice the movement. "What have you done with your Irish people?" "Sent to the Dragon for a good meal for them, poor wretches. And then, luckily, I caught Father Grady, and I've asked him in to speak to them and dissuade them from going off in a body. How did Miss Ale go home? I'm sure she could not walk." "She had a cab. Everything was done properly, even to the paying. Let us talk of something else. She has caused disturbance enough." "I don't know where I should have been but for her." "Are you become so helpless as to have to be defended by a girl?" asked Mrs. Thornton scornfully. He reddened. "Not many girls would have taken the blows on herself which were meant for me, meant with right down goodwill, too." "A girl in love will do a good deal," replied Mrs. Thornton shortly. Mother. He made a step forwards, stood still, heaved with passion. She was a little startled at the evident force he used to keep himself calm. She was not sure of the nature of the emotions she had provoked. It was only their violence that was clear. Was it anger? His eyes glowed, his figure was dilated, his breath came thick and fast. It was a mixture of joy, of anger, of pride, of glad surprise, of panting doubt, but she could not read it. Still it made her uneasy, as the presence of all strong feeling of which the cause is not fully understood or sympathized in always has this effect. She went to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and took out a duster which she kept there for any occasional purpose. She had seen a drop of eau de cologne on the polished arm of the sofa and instinctively sought to wipe it off. But she kept her back turned to her son much longer than was necessary, and when she spoke, her voice seemed unusual and constrained. "You have taken some steps about the rioters, I suppose. You don't apprehend any more violence, do you? Where were the police? Never at hand when they're wanted." "On the contrary, I saw 3 or 4 of 'em when the gates gave way, struggling and beating about in fine fashion, and Moore came running up just when the yard was clearing. I might have given some of the fellows in charge then if I had had my wits about me. But there will be no difficulty. Plenty of people can identify them." "But won't they come back tonight?" "I'm going to see about a sufficient guard for the premises. I have appointed to meet Captain Hanbury in half an hour at the station." "You must have some tea first." "Tea? Yes, I suppose I must. It's 6:30 and I may be out for some time. Don't sit up for me, Mother." "You expect me to go to bed before I have seen you safe, do you?" "Well, perhaps not." He hesitated for a moment. "But if I have time, I shall go round by Crampton after I have arranged with the police and seen Hamper and Clarkson." Their eyes met. They looked at each other intently for a minute. Then she asked, "Why are you going round by Crampton?" "To ask after Miss Ale." "I will send. Williams must take the waterbed she came to ask for. Ye shall inquire how she is." "I must go myself." "Not merely to ask how Miss Ale is?" "No, not merely for that. I want to thank her for the way in which she stood between me and the mob." "What made you go down at all? It was putting your head into the lion's mouth." He glanced sharply at her, saw that she did not know what had passed between him and Margaret in the drawing-room, and replied by another question. "Shall you be afraid to be left without me till I can get some of the police, or had we better send Williams for them now, and they could be here by the time we have done tea? There's no time to be lost. I must be off in 1/4 of an hour." Mrs. Thornton left the room. Her servants wondered at her directions, usually so sharply cut and decided, now confused and uncertain. Mr. Thornton remained in the dining-room, trying to think of the business he had to do at the police office, and, in reality, thinking of Margaret. Everything seemed dim and vague beyond, behind, besides. The touch of her arms round his neck, the soft clinging which made the dark color come and go in his cheek as he thought of it. The tea would have been very silent, but for Fanny's perpetual description of her own feelings, how she had been alarmed, and then thought they were gone, and then felt sick and faint and trembling in every limb. "There, that's enough," said her brother, rising from the table. "The reality was enough for me." He was going to leave the room when his mother stopped him with her hand upon his arm. "You will come back here before you go to the Hales," said she, in a low, anxious tone. "I know what I know," said Fanny to herself. "Why, will it be too late to disturb them?" "John, come back to me for this one evening. It will be late for Mrs. Ale, but that is not it. Tomorrow you will... Come back tonight, John." She had seldom pleaded with her son at all. She was too proud for that. But she had never pleaded in vain. "I will return straight here after I've done my business. You will be sure to inquire after them, after her." Mrs. Thornton was by no means a talkative companion to Fanny, nor yet a good listener while her son was absent. But on his return, her eyes and ears were keen to see and to listen to all the details which he could give as to the steps he had taken to secure himself and those whom he chose to employ from any repetition of the day's outrages. He clearly saw his object. Punishment and suffering were the natural consequences to those who had taken part in the riot. All that was necessary in order that property should be protected and that the will of the proprietor might cut to his end clean and sharp as a sword. "Mother, you know what I've got to say to Miss Hale tomorrow?" The question came upon her suddenly, during a pause in which she, at least, had forgotten Margaret. She looked up at him. "Yes, I do. You can hardly do otherwise." "Do otherwise? I don't understand you." "I mean that, after allowing her feelings so to overcome her, I consider you bound in honour." "Bound in honour," said he scornfully. "I'm afraid honour has nothing to do with it. Her feelings overcome her. What feelings do you mean?" "Nay, John, there is no need to be angry. Did she not rush down and cling to you to save you from danger?" "She did," said he. "But, mother," continued he, stopping short in his walk right in front of her, "I dare not hope. I never was faint-hearted before, but I cannot believe such a creature cares for me." "Don't be foolish, John. Such a creature. Why, she might be a duke's daughter to hear you speak, and what proof more would you have, I wonder, of her caring for you? I can believe she is at a struggle with her aristocratic way of viewing things, but I like her the better for seeing clearly at last. It is a good deal for me to say," said Mrs. Thornton, smiling slowly while the tears stood in her eyes. "For after tonight, I stand second. It was to have you to myself, all to myself a few hours longer, that I begged you not to go till tomorrow." "Dearest mother." Still, love is selfish, and in an instant he reverted to his own hopes and fears in a way that drew the cold creeping shadow over Mrs. Thornton's heart. "But I know she does not care for me. I shall put myself at her feet. I must. If it were but one chance in 1,000 or 1,000,000, I should do it." "Don't fear," said his mother, crushing down her own personal mortification at the little notice he had taken of the rare ebullition of her maternal feelings, of the pang of jealousy that betrayed the intensity of her disregarded love. "Don't be afraid," she said coldly. "As far as love may go, she may be worthy of you. It must have taken a good deal to overcome her pride." "Don't be afraid, John," said she, kissing him as she wished him good night. And she went slowly and majestically out of the room. But when she got into her own, she locked the door and sat down to cry unwanted tears. Margaret entered the room where her father and mother still sat holding low conversation together, looking very pale and white. She came close up to them before she could trust herself to speak. "Mrs. Thornton will send the waterbed, Mamma." "Dear, how tired you look. Is it very hot, Margaret?" "Very hot, and the streets are rather rough with the strike." Margaret's colour came back vivid and bright as ever, but it faded away instantly. "Here has been a message from Bessie Higgins asking you to go to her," said Mrs. Hale. "But I'm sure you look too tired." "Yes," said Margaret, "I am tired. I cannot go." She was very silent and trembling while she made tea. She was thankful to see her father so much occupied with her mother as not to notice her looks. Even after her mother went to bed, he was not content to be absent from her, but undertook to read her to sleep. Margaret was alone. "Now I will think of it. Now I will remember it all. I could not before. I dared not." She sat still in her chair, her hands clasped on her knees, her lips compressed, her eyes fixed as one who sees a vision. She drew a deep breath. "I who hate scenes, I who have despised people for showing emotion, who have thought them wanting in self-control, I went down and must needs throw myself into the mêlée like a romantic fool? Did I do any good? They would have gone away without me, I dare say." But this was overleaping the rational conclusion, as in an instant her well-poised judgment felt. No, perhaps they would not. I did some good. But what possessed me to defend that man as if he were a helpless child? "Ah," said she, clenching her hands together. "It is no wonder those people thought I was in love with him, after disgracing myself in that way. I in love, and with him too." Her pale cheeks suddenly became one flame of fire, and she covered her face with her hands. When she took them away, her palms were wet with scalding tears. "Oh, how low I am fallen that they should say that of me. I could not have been so brave for anyone else, just because he was so utterly indifferent to me, if, indeed, I do not positively dislike him. It made me the more anxious that there should be fair play on each side, and I could see what fair play was. It was not fair," said she vehemently, "that he should stand there, sheltered, awaiting the soldiers who might catch those poor maddened creatures as in a trap, without an effort on his part to bring them to reason. And it was worse than unfair for them to set on him as they threatened. I would do it again, let who will say what they like of me. If I saved one blow, one cruel, angry action that might otherwise have been committed, I did a woman's work. Let them insult my maiden pride as they will. I walk pure before God." She looked up, and a noble peace seemed to descend and calm her face, till it was stiller than chiseled marble. Dixon came in.
"If you please, Miss Margaret, here's the water-bed from Mrs. Thornton's. It's too late for tonight, I'm afraid, for Mrs. is nearly asleep, but it will do nicely for tomorrow."
"Very," said Margaret. "You must send our best thanks." Dixon left the room for a moment.
"If you please, Miss Margaret, he says he's to ask particular how you are. I think he must mean Mrs., but he says his last words were to ask how Miss Ale was."
"Me," said Margaret, drawing herself up. "I am quite well. Tell him I am perfectly well." But her complexion was as deadly white as her handkerchief, and her head ached intensely. Mr. Hale now came in. He had left his sleeping wife, and wanted, as Margaret saw, to be amused and interested by something that she was to tell him. With sweet patience did she bear her pain, without a word of complaint, and rummaged up numberless small subjects for conversation, all except the riot, and that she never named once. It turned her sick to think of it. "Good night, Margaret. I have every chance of a good night myself, and you are looking very pale with your watching. I shall call Dixon if your mother needs anything. Do you go to bed and sleep like a top, for I am sure you need it, poor child." "Good night, Papa." She let her color go, the forced smile fade away, the eyes grow dull with heavy pain. She released her strong will from its laborious task. Till morning she might feel ill and weary. She lay down and never stirred. To move hand or foot, or even so much as one finger, would have been an exertion beyond the powers of either volition or motion. She was so tired so stunned that she thought she never slept at all. Her feverish thoughts passed and repassed the boundary between sleeping and waking, and kept their own miserable identity. She could not be alone, prostrate, powerless as she was. A cloud of faces looked up at her, giving her no idea of fierce, vivid anger or of personal danger, but a deep sense of shame that she should thus be the object of universal regard. A sense of shame so acute that it seemed as if she would fain have burrowed into the earth to hide herself, and yet she could not escape out of that unwinking glare of many eyes. Chapter 24. Mistakes cleared up. Your beauty was the first that won the place and scaled the walls of my undaunted heart, which, captive now, pines in a cative case, unkindly met with rigor for desert. Yet not the less your servant shall abide, in spite of rude repulse or silent pride. William Fowler. The next morning, Margaret dragged herself up, thankful that the night was over, unrefreshed, yet rested. All had gone well through the house. Her mother had only wakened once. A little breeze was stirring in the hot air, and though there were no trees to show the playful tossing movement caused by the wind among the leaves, Margaret knew how, somewhere or another, by wayside, in copses, or in thick green woods, there was a pleasant murmuring, dancing sound, a rushing and falling noise, the very thought of which was an echo of distant gladness in her heart. She sat at her work in Mrs. Hale's room. As soon as that forenoon slumber was over, she would help her mother to dress after dinner. She would go and see Bessie Higgins. She would banish all recollection of the Thornton family. No need to think of them till they absolutely stood before her in flesh and blood. But of course, the effort not to think of them brought them only the more strongly before her, and from time to time the hot flush came over her pale face, sweeping it into color, as a sunbeam from between watery clouds comes swiftly moving over the sea. Dixon opened the door very softly and stole on tiptoe up to Margaret, sitting by the shaded window.
"Mr. Thornton, Miss Margaret. He's in the drawing-room."
Margaret dropped her sewing. "Did he ask for me? Isn't Papa come in?"
"He asked for you, miss, and Master is out."
"Very well, I will come," said Margaret quietly, but she lingered strangely. Mr. Thornton stood by one of the windows with his back to the door, apparently absorbed in watching something in the street. But in truth, he was afraid of himself. His heart beat thick at the thought of her coming. He could not forget the touch of her arms around his neck, impatiently felt as it had been at the time, but now the recollection of her clinging defense of him seemed to thrill him through and through, to melt away every resolution, all power of self-control, as if it were a wax before a fire. He dreaded lest he should go forwards to meet her with his arms held out in mute entreaty that she would come and nestle there as she had done all unheeded the day before, but never unheeded again. His heart throbbed loud and quick. Strong man as he was, he trembled at the anticipation of what he had to say, and how it might be received. She might droop and flush and flutter to his arms as to her natural home and resting place. One moment he glowed with impatience at the thought that she might do this. The next he feared a passionate rejection, the very idea of which withered up his future with so deadly a blight that he refused to think of it. He was startled by the sense of the presence of someone else in the room. He turned round. She had come in so gently that he had never heard her. The street noises had been more distinct to his inattentive ear than her slow movements in her soft muslin gown. She stood by the table, not offering to sit down. Her eyelids were dropped half over her eyes. Her teeth were shut, not compressed. Her lips were just parted over them, allowing the white line to be seen between their curve. Her slow, deep breathings dilated her thin and beautiful nostrils. It was the only motion visible on her countenance. The fine-grained skin, the oval cheek, the rich outline of her mouth, its corners deep set in dimples, were all wan and pale today, the loss of their usual natural healthy color being made more evident by the heavy shadow of the dark hair brought down upon the temples to hide all sign of the blow she had received. Her head, for all its drooping eyes, was thrown a little back in the old proud attitude. Her long arms hung motionless by her sides. Altogether, she looked like some prisoner falsely accused of a crime that she loathed and despised, and from which she was too indignant to justify herself. Mr. Thornton made a hasty step or two forwards, recovered himself, and went with quiet firmness to the door, which she had left open, and shut it. Then he came back, and stood opposite to her for a moment, receiving the general impression of her beautiful presence, before he dared to disturb it, perhaps to repel it by what he had to say. "Miss Hale, I was very ungrateful yesterday." "You had nothing to be grateful for," said she, raising her eyes and looking full and straight at him. "You mean, I suppose, that you believe you ought to thank me for what I did." In spite of herself, in defiance of her anger, the thick blushes came all over her face and burnt into her very eyes, which fell not, nevertheless, from their grave and steady look. "It was only a natural instinct. Any woman would have done just the same. We all feel the sanctity of our sex as a high privilege when we see danger. I ought rather," said she hastily, "to apologize to you for having said thoughtless words which sent you down into the danger." "It was not your words. It was the truth they conveyed, pungently as it was expressed. But you shall not drive me off upon that, and so escape the expression of my deep gratitude, my—" He was on the verge now. He would not speak in the haste of his hot passion. He would weigh each word. He would. And his will was triumphant. He stopped in mid-career. "I do not try to escape from anything," said she. "I simply say that you owe me no gratitude, and I may add that any expression of it will be painful to me because I do not feel that I deserve it. Still, if it will relieve you from even a fancied obligation, speak on." "I do not want to be relieved from any obligation," said he, goaded by her calm manner. "Fancied or not fancied, I question not myself to know which. I choose to believe that I owe my very life to you. Smile, and think it an exaggeration if you will. I believe it, because it adds a value to that life to think. Oh, Miss Hale," continued he, lowering his voice to such a tender intensity of passion that she shivered and trembled before him, "to think circumstance so wrought that whenever I exult in existence henceforward, I may say to myself, all this gladness in life, all honest pride in doing my work in the world, all this keen sense of being, I owe to her. And it doubles the gladness, it makes the pride glow, it sharpens the sense of existence till I hardly know if it is pain or pleasure to think that I owe it to one. Nay, you shall hear," said he, stepping forwards with stern determination. "To one whom I love as I do not believe man ever loved woman before." He held her hand tight in his. He panted as he listened for what should come. He threw the hand away with indignation as he heard her icy tone. For icy it was, though the words came faltering out, as if she knew not where to find them.
"Your way of speaking shocks me. It is blasphemous. I cannot help it if that is my first feeling. It might not be so, I dare say, if I understood the kind of feeling you describe. I do not want to vex you, and besides, we must speak gently, for Mamma is asleep. But your whole manner offends me."
"How?" exclaimed he. "Offends you? I am indeed most unfortunate."
"Yes," said she with recovered dignity. "I do feel offended, and I think justly. You seem to fancy that my conduct of yesterday—" Again the deep carnation blush, but this time with eyes kindling with indignation rather than shame, "was a personal act between you and me, and that you may come and thank me for it, instead of perceiving, as a gentleman would, yes, a gentleman," she repeated in allusion to their former conversation about that word, "that any woman worthy of the name of woman would come forward to shield with her reverenced helplessness a man in danger from the violence of numbers."
"And the gentleman thus rescued is forbidden the relief of thanks," he broke in contemptuously. "I am a man. I claim the right of expressing my feelings."
"And I yielded to the right, simply saying that you gave me pain by insisting upon it," she replied proudly. "But you seem to have imagined that I was not merely guided by womanly instinct, but—" and here the passionate tears, kept down for long, struggled with vehemently, came up into her eyes and choked her voice, "but that I was prompted by some particular feeling for you. You! Why, there was not a man, not a poor desperate man in all that crowd for whom I had not more sympathy, for whom I should not have done what little I could more heartily."
"You may speak on, Miss Ale. I am aware of all these misplaced sympathies of yours. I now believe that it was only your innate sense of oppression, yes, I, though a master, may be oppressed, that made you act so nobly as you did. I know you despise me. Allow me to say, it is because you do not understand me."
"I do not care to understand," she replied, taking hold of the table to steady herself, for she thought him cruel, as indeed he was, and she was weak with her indignation.
"No, I see you do not. You are unfair and unjust."
Margaret compressed her lips. She would not speak in answer to such accusations. But, for all that, for all his savage words, he could have thrown himself at her feet and kissed the hem of her garment. She did not speak. She did not move. The tears of wounded pride fell hot and fast. He waited a while, longing for her to say something, even a taunt to which he might reply. But she was silent. He took up his hat.
"One word more. You look as if you thought it tainted you to be loved by me. You cannot avoid it. Nay, I, if I would, cannot cleanse you from it. But I would not if I could. I have never loved any woman before. My life has been too busy, my thoughts too much absorbed with other things. Now I love, and will love. But do not be afraid of too much expression on my part."
"I am not afraid," she replied, lifting herself straight up. "No one yet has ever dared to be impertinent to me, and no one ever shall." "But, Mr. Thornton, you have been very kind to my father," said she, changing her whole tone and bearing to a most womanly softness. Don't let us go on making each other angry. Pray don't." He took no notice of her words. He occupied himself in smoothing the nap of his hat with his coat sleeve for half a minute or so, and then, rejecting her offered hand, and making as if he did not see her grave look of regret, he turned abruptly away and left the room. Margaret caught one glance at his face before he went. When he was gone, she thought she had seen the gleam of unshed tears in his eyes, and that turned her proud dislike into something different and kinder, if nearly as painful. Self-reproach for having caused such mortification to anyone. "But how could I help it?" asked she of herself. "I never liked him. I was civil, but I took no trouble to conceal my indifference. Indeed, I never thought about myself or him, so my manners must have shown the truth. All that yesterday he might mistake, but that is his fault, not mine. I would do it again if need were, though it does lead me into all this shame and trouble."
The lady doth protest too much, methinks. So, Thornton, dude, tears in his eyes. And the whole scene with his mom, wasn't that lovely? I was going to say interesting, but it's not. It's lovely. That reluctance that she has to let him go. And it's interesting because I've never, not with this book, I've never gotten any kind of weird Oedipal thing between them. It really does seem to be a relationship of, I mean, aside from just mother-son stuff, of real mutual respect for each other's strengths, massive amounts of strength. And so that moment of saying, please don't go tonight. Just let us stay like this. It is a scene that I particularly like in the miniseries. The woman who plays his mother is spectacular. They all are. But one of the interesting things for you who decide to watch the miniseries that I'm curious to see if you have the same reaction that I do. I have found that I much prefer this last Thornton-Margaret scene in the book than in the miniseries. And I was trying all week long to figure out what is it about the scene in the filmed version that was bugging me so much. And ultimately, I think it comes down to this. In the book, of course, we get all of the Margaret in her head stuff, all of her rationalizing and all of her kind of talking herself out of admitting the fact that we can all see that she's attracted to him. And it could be a fiery attraction and a tempestuous attraction, but she's not even acknowledging that there is an attraction there. And that is a problem because it leads her to behave like she behaved in the scene today. In the movie, of course, they can't do all of that internal thinking stuff because they don't really have a voiceover narration motif going in this particular miniseries. Sometimes they do things like that, but they didn't here. And it would be strangely intrusive, I think, in the filmed version as it stands. Plus, 4 episodes is not a lot to cover this book. A lot happens in this book. So I am not saying that I dislike the scene as it was filmed. It's that I like the book's version better because Margaret makes more sense. Actually, both of them, I think, make a lot more sense in the book because Thornton has a little bit more time to explain himself and to respond and to say that line that I think is so revealing. You dislike me because you don't know me. And it's true. I mean, her prejudice, and we've talked about it before, that this really should be called Pride and Prejudice. Her pride and her prejudices towards manufacturers prevent her from seeing who he really is, from letting herself get to know him the way that her father has, for example. And that's a shame. But didn't you find her kind of talking herself down from the excitement of the previous day? That whole scene where she just works herself into the rationalization that she would have done it for any of the men in the mob, and she would do it again, and let them insult her maiden pride. She walks pure before God. And I thought, oh, wow. Nothing is more A, insufferable, or B, impossible to talk to than someone who is self-righteous. And boy, is she right here, right now, which is interesting because she is not that kind of character 98% of the time. It's just when it comes to Mr. Thornton. And I say the self-righteous thing, knowing full well how often I have spent my time being self-righteous. So I am pointing the finger back at myself on that one as well. And I think for the rest of our time together, I am going to play you out by letting you listen to part of the conversation right before we get to new spoilers between our Victorian scholar and me. So here you are, our Professor Emeritus of Victorian Literature, Larry Effelman.
I read an article last night just published on Gaskell and North and South, and the argument of these authors is sort of along these lines, that if this problem, the problem being the condition of the working classes, is, as Gaskell presents it, is going to be solved, it's not going to be solved by the minister, who's a kind of retiring sort of character who has sort of signed off on his obligations. He's come there, he gives lectures, and he does these kinds of things, but he does nothing really to improve the quality of life of the various people he meets there. Whereas Margaret and Thornton and Higgins have to fight it out, each pair between them, in order to get anywhere, in order to create something new. They can't be retiring. They can't do what her father has done. They have to meet each other face to face and fight this out and argue it out. And that's the way Gaskell has set this novel up.
I wonder if that was shocking to have a woman be in the middle of all of that. Because Margaret's very girl-y, she's very much, she seems to me to be someone who very much keeps in her place, where Jane Eyre doesn't exactly do that. Jane tends to get in people's faces more.
Well, Margaret might not get in, say, Thornton's face, as you put it, quite as badly or as much as other heroines might, but she's in there fighting.
She does throw her arms around his neck scandalously in front of the rioters.
It's clear from the very beginning of the novel that Thornton and she are attracted to each other, and that ultimately this is going to work out.
Yep.
On page 60 in the edition I read, for instance, we discover that Mr. Thornton has replaced the offensive wallpaper.
Yes.
Well, that's a sign he's not as awful a person as Margaret has supposed. So that inevitably the two are going to work this out. But it's not going to be easy, and Margaret is going to assert herself, as she must. And Higgins will assert himself. And it's between those assertions, the arguing between Margaret and Thornton, and the arguing between Thornton and Higgins, that creates progress. Margaret's father doesn't create any progress. He has retreated, and he's very sad, and he's sorry, and he has the right sort of emotions, but he doesn't do anything. Whereas Margaret, in her own way, forces the issue.
And all the way along too, when she goes up and she's looking at the property.
Oh yeah.
And just taking the bull by the horns over and over again.
Well, you can note, I think, that she has an almost masculine role in Victorian terms, not masculine role in terms of truth.
Right.
But she does all of the work in that family. She organizes the move.
Yep.
She finds the place to live. she gets the wallpaper changed. She asserts herself over and over again in places where some kind of leadership is necessary. So she has an almost unconventional role from the very beginning of the novel.
I was surprised at how very, very modern she felt as a character in some ways. And then there are moments like the wallpaper. The first time I read it, I thought, oh, really? Seriously? That is the only thing you're going to... And then I thought, no. If you're a woman, you are going to be spending at least 80% of your days in that room with that wallpaper. And if it's a Charlotte Perkins Gilman yellow wallpaper situation,
then you really need to make a change.
You need to change the wallpaper. It's not a small thing if that's the only room you get to live your life in for the most part, except for, visiting.
Yeah.
And there was no one to visit there, so.
Yeah, and it's also clear early in the novel that Margaret likes Mr. Thornton's rendition of his early life. She admires his plain spokenness. What's needed is something between the two to overcome the prejudice and the misunderstanding between them. They fundamentally are attracted to each other, and then, as in any relationship, the rest of it has to be worked out.
That's so true. It's like the easy part's done. Now we got to get the hard
changed
part
the wallpaper. Now get on with it.
If only life were that simple all
yes,
the time.
Indeed. And she recognizes that Thornton may be hard, but he's also fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's something that she can respect.
There has to be a point at the beginning, something she can respect in order for this relationship to continue. They basically have to believe that the other will be fair.
That's true. Because it's true of Thornton too, that for him to open up, I mean, you can tell that for him to open up at all is a risk.
Yeah, it is. And as we learn, he's not had an easy time. His father went into debt, and he worked himself as a child and brought this family back from economic privation. So he's not had an easy life. In his own way, he's become as hardened to life as Higgins is.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 347, I Can Call You Betty. Well, hello. I hope you have had a fabulous week. I have had a fabulous week, and it is almost entirely due to CraftLit listeners. I had such a great time at the Yarn Cloud last weekend doing the cognitive anchoring talky thing and meeting some really fantastic and very long-time listeners, and it was such a joy. It was really, really marvelous. And you may be wondering why I named this podcast I Can Call You Betty. And that is because yesterday, for reasons that are unlikely to become clear ever, I looked something up on YouTube for some of the curriculum that I'm working on right now. And one of the YouTube videos that showed up in the margin of the search window was the original video with Paul Simon and Chevy Chase, the original video for You Can Call Me Al, which, if you are of a certain age, is now an earworm for you. You're welcome. I have not been able to get this song out of my head. For those of you who are younger, you may not know this fantastic Paul Simon album. So I watched the video. Of course I do, because now all I had to do was see the picture and the title of the song, and I had to watch the video. So I watched the video and I thought, my gosh, this song really holds up. It's just a fun, boppy, interesting song, musically interesting song. So that led to Under African Skies, which led to Graceland, which led to, So I have linked to the video in the show notes for episode 347. Those of you who are youngsters, go take a look at this video. It's grainy because it's the standard definition version. They're not going to upload a high def version, but the music's great. So I got a fantastic comment on the show notes from, I actually don't know if it's pronounced Anya or Ania. I am not positive at all. Please correct me. But she left this fantastic and very, very useful comment. She said, "Hi, Heather. I'm an American who moved to England when I was 20, and I lived there for 13 years. I lived in the town of Brighton, 60 miles south of London, on the south coast. When I first got there and heard English people talking about wanting to get, quote, pebbles from the beach in Brighton to put in their gardens, I was surprised. To me, the rocks that make up the beach at Brighton were not pebbles, but rocks the size of my fist. So in response to your query about Margaret being hit on the head by a pebble, I think the British understanding of pebble is perhaps broader than the American one and encompasses larger sized stones." Very useful information. And boy, yeah, denotation and connotation, people. There we go. So, chapter 25. There's a lot going on in chapter 25 that I want to prep you for. The first thing is that Elizabeth Gaskell's opening poem selection is from Lord Byron. And it's from a Lord Byron poem I didn't know existed. It's from a poem called The Island, which he wrote in 1823, and it's his poem about the mutiny on the Bounty. Now, if we think about mutiny on the Bounty, then we think of mutiny, then we think of, Frederick. And that's correct, because this chapter 25, is actually called Frederick. But before we can get to discussing Frederick, we need to find out how Margaret's going to be reacting to Mr. Thornton. Because last time we saw them, she was kind of distraught, and he had tears in his eyes when he left. And that is pretty, as you might imagine, significant. So we get to watch Margaret spiral out of control in her own brain for a little while at the beginning of this chapter. And then when she tries to mentally go away and not think about this anymore, Elizabeth Gaskell has her quote, and it's not just a straight quote, it's kind of twisting a quote from Edward Fairfax back in 1600. He translated Tasso's Jerusalem Liberata. The original line was, "Her sweet idea wandered through his thought." But because of Margaret's situation with Thornton, instead of her sweet idea wandered, this image of her wandered through his thoughts, it is now her thinking about Thornton. And so the quote has been morphed into a female's version of it. So that's kind of cool. And as happened with Jane Eyre, there is a line of French in here. The French literally means, do what you should do, come what may. So do it whether it's going to turn out well or not. That is the French that you will hear. And there's also some of the Northern England slang in this chapter that we'll hear. Knob sticks, to remind you, are scabs. Those are strike breakers. Those are people who cross the strike lines in order to work. Physic powder, which is not Northern English slang. Physic powder would have been medicine that came in powdered form. And I wanted to find out more about this because there's a throwaway that you put the powder into jelly in order to make it go down better. Because a lot of those medicines were compounded, they were ground up in a mortar and a pestle, and they were not particularly good tasting. I remember as a child, my grandmother would crush up pills. I have no idea what it was that I was taking. I assume it was aspirin or something like that. And she would put it in a teaspoon of honey. And so the powder was coated with the honey and it didn't taste bad anymore. However, Bessie's point about physic powder in jelly is that the jelly may be the largest part of what you're taking, but the powder is so bitter and potent that it still overwhelms the flavor of the jelly. Well, this made me start thinking about, well, jellies and medicines and things like that. And I found out a bunch of really interesting pages on Victorian medicine. So I'm just throwing them all in the show notes because you may be interested too. And that led me to jellies and how to make jellies without powdered gelatin, and then Victorian era makeup. So I have a lot of really random links that you might be interested in following. They're just kind of fun, but they're all there on the show notes for 347. Some more slang is thou'll never go peach, which means you'll never go inform on. You'll never peach that guy. And the thee and the thou show up here, which does two things. It lets us know that Bessie is at least a little old-fashioned, because already the thee and the thou were being leached out of everyday usage of English. It was still in the King James Bible, but you didn't hear it on the street quite as much. It used to be that thee and thou were the more familiar form of you, and you was the more formal. But over time, it morphed, and the thee and thou got dropped, and you just became the general way to refer to someone other than yourself. So that's going to pop up a bit in Bessie's speech. And again, the word clem is starving. So a clemmed person would be a person who is, in fact, starving. Purring, Purring, is slang for kicking, like in a fight situation. And that is all for the tricky bits. So now we're going to listen to chapter 25 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 25. Frederick. Revenge may have her own. Roused discipline aloud proclaims their cause, and injured navies urge their broken laws. Byron. Margaret began to wonder whether all offers were as unexpected beforehand, as distressing at the time of their occurrence as the two she had had. An involuntary comparison between Mr. Lennox and Mr. Thornton arose in her mind. She had been sorry that an expression of any other feeling than friendship had been lured out by circumstances from Henry Lennox. That regret was the predominant feeling on the first occasion of her receiving a proposal. She had not felt so stunned, so impressed as she did now, when echoes of Mr. Thornton's voice yet lingered about the room. In Lennox's case, he seemed for a moment to have slid over the boundary between friendship and love, and the instant afterwards to regret it nearly as much as she did, although for different reasons. In Mr. Thornton's case, as far as Margaret knew, there was no intervening stage of friendship. Their intercourse had been one continued series of opposition. Their opinions clashed, and indeed she had never perceived that he had cared for her opinions as belonging to her, the individual. As far as they defied his rock-like power of character, his passion strength, he seemed to throw them off from him with contempt, until she felt the weariness of the exertion of making useless protests. And now he had come in this strange, wild, passionate way to make known his love? For although at first it had struck her that his offer was forced and goaded out of him by sharp compassion for the exposure she had made of herself, which he, like others, might misunderstand, yet even before he left the room, and certainly not 5 minutes after, the clear conviction dawned upon her, shined bright upon her, that he did love her, that he had loved her, that he would love her. And she shrank and shuddered as under the fascination of some great power, repugnant to her whole previous life. She crept away and hid from his idea. But it was of no use. To parody a line out of Fairfax's Tasso,
His strong idea wandered through her thought. She disliked him the more for having mastered her inner will. How dared he say that he would love her still, even though she shook him off with contempt? She wished she had spoken more stronger. Sharp, decisive speeches came thronging into her mind now that it was too late to utter them. The deep impression made by the interview was like that of a horror in a dream that will not leave the room although we waken up and rub our eyes and force a stiff, rigid smile upon our lips. It is there, cowering and gibbering with fixed, ghastly eyes in some corner of the chamber, listening to hear whether we dare to breathe of its presence to anyone. And we dare not, poor cowards that we are. And so she shuddered away from the threat of his enduring love. What did he mean? Had she not the power to daunt him? She would see. It was more daring than became a man to threaten her so. Did he ground it upon the miserable yesterday? If need were, she would do the same tomorrow, by a crippled beggar, willingly and gladly. But by him she would do it just as bravely, in spite of his deductions and the cold slime of women's impertinence. She did it because it was right and simple and true to save where she could save, even to try to save. Fais ce que doit, advienne que pourra. Hitherto she had not stirred from where he had left her. No outward circumstances had roused her out of the trance of thought in which she had been plunged by his last words and by the look of his deep, intent, passionate eyes, as their flames had made her own fall before them. She went to the window and threw it open to dispel the oppression which hung around her. Then she went and opened the door with a sort of impetuous wish to shake off the recollection of the past hour in the company of others or in active exertion. But all was profoundly hushed in the noonday stillness of a house where an invalid catches the unrefreshing sleep that is denied to the night hours. Margaret would not be alone. What should she do? Go and see Bessie Higgins, of course, thought she, as the recollection of the message sent the night before flashed into her mind. And away she went. When she got there, she found Bessie lying on the settle, moved close to the fire, though the day was sultry and oppressive. She was laid down quite flat, as if resting languidly after some paroxysm of pain. Margaret felt sure she ought to have the greater freedom of breathing which a more sitting posture would procure, and, without a word, she raised her up, and so arranged the pillows that Bessie was more at ease, though very languid. "I thought I should not have seen you again," said she at last, looking wistfully in Margaret's face. "I'm afraid you're much worse, but I could not have come yesterday. My mother was so ill. For many reasons," said Margaret, colouring. "You'd mayhappen think I went beyond my place in sending Mary for you, but the wrangling and the loud voices had just done me to pieces, and I thought when father left, oh, if I could just hear a voice reading me some words of peace and promise, I could die away into the silence and rest of God, just as a baby is hushed up to sleep by its mother's lullaby. Shall I read you a chapter now?" "Aye, do. Mayhappen I shan't listen to the sense at first. It will seem far away, but when you come to words I like, to the comforting texts, it'll seem close in my ear and going through me as it were." Margaret began. Bessie tossed to and fro. If by an effort she attended for one moment, it seemed as though she were convulsed into double restlessness the next. At last she burst out, "Don't go on reading. It's no use. I'm blaspheming all the time in my mind with thinking angrily on what cannot be helped. You'd hear of the riot may happen yesterday at Marble Mills, Thornton's factory, you know." "Your father was not there, was he?" said Margaret, colouring deep.
nor he. He'd ha' given his right hand if it had never come to pass. It's that that's fretting me. He's fairly knocked down in his mind by it. It's no use telling him fools will always break out of bounds. You never saw a man so downhearted as he is. But why? Asked Margaret. I don't understand. Well, you see, he's a committee man on this special strike. The union appointed him because, though I say it as I shouldn't say it, he's reckoned a deep chap and true to the backbone. And he and the other committee men laid the plans. They were to hold together through thick and thin what the major part thought the others were to think, whether they would or no. And above all, there was to be no going again the law of the land. Folk would go with them if they saw them striving and starving with dumb patience. But if there was once any noise of fighting and struggling, even with knobsticks, all was up, as they knew by the experience of many and many a time before. They would try and get speech through the knobsticks, and coax them, and reason with them, and mayhap and warn them off. But whatever came, the committee charged all members of the union to lie down and die if need were, without striking a blow. And then they reckoned they were sure of carrying the public with them. And beside all that, committee knew they were right in their demand, and they didn't want to have right all mixed up with wrong till folk can't separate it. No more nor I can the physic powder from the jelly you gave me to mix it in. Jelly is much the biggest, but powder tastes it all through. Well, I've told you at length about this'n, but I'm tired out. You just think for yourself what it mun be for father to have his work undone, and by such a fool as Boucher, who must needs go right again the orders of committee and ruin the strike just as bad as if he meant to be a Judas. But father did him last night. He went so far as to say he'd go and tell police where they might find the ringleader of the riot. He'd give him up to the mill owners to do what they would with him. He'd show the world that the real leaders of the strike were not such as Boucher, but steady, thoughtful men, good hands and good citizens, who were friendly to law and judgment, and would uphold order, who only wanted their right wage, and wouldn't work, even though they starved till they got 'em, but who would never injure property or life, for, dropping her voice, they do say that Boucher threw a stone at Thornton's sister that well he killed her. That's not true, said Margaret. It was not Boucher that threw the stone. She went first red, then white. You'd be there then, were you? Asked Bessie languidly, for indeed she had spoken with many pauses, as if speech was unusually difficult to her. Yes, never mind, go on, only it was not Boucher that threw the stone. But what did he answer to your father? He did not speak words. He were all in such a tremble with spent passion, I could not bear to look at him. I heard his breath coming quick, and at one time I thought he were sobbing. But when father said he'd give him up to the police, he gave a great cry and struck father on the face with his closed fist and be off like lightning. Father were stunned with the blow at first, for all Boucher were weak with passion and with clemming. He sat down a bit, put his hand afore his eyes, and then made for the door. I don't know where I got strength, but I threw myself off the settle and clung to him. Father, father, said I, thou'll never go peach on that poor clemmed man. I'll never leave go on thee till thou sayest thou won it. Do not be a fool, says he. Words come readier than deeds to most men. I never thought of telling the police on him, though by God he deserves it, and I should not have minded if someone else had done the dirty work and got him clapped up. But now he has strucken me, I could do it less nor ever, for it would be getting other men to take up my quarrel. But if ever he gets well over this claiming and is in good condition, he and I'll have an up and down fight, purring and all, and I'll see what I can do for him. And so father shook me off, for indeed I was low and faint enough, and his face was all clay white, where it weren't bloody, and turned me sick to look at. And I know not if I slept or waked, or in a dead swoon, till Mary came in, and I telled her to fetch you to me. And now, do not talk to me, but just read out the chapter. I'm easier in my mind for having spit it out, but I want some thoughts of the world that's far away to take the weary taste of it out of my mouth. Read me not a sermon chapter, but a story chapter. They've pictures in them which I see when my eyes are shut. Read about the new heavens and the new earth, and mayhappen I'll forget this.
Margaret read in her soft, low voice. Though Bessie's eyes were shut, she was listening for some time, for the moisture of tears gathered heavy on her eyelashes. At last she slept, with many starts and muttered pleadings. Margaret covered her up and left her, for she had an uneasy consciousness that she might be wanted at home, and yet, until now, it seemed cruel to leave the dying girl. Mrs. Hale was in the drawing-room on her daughter's return. It was one of her better days, and she was full of praises of the water-bed. It had been more like the beds at Sir John Beresford's than anything she had slept on since. She did not know how it was, but people seemed to have lost the art of making the same kind of beds as they used to do in her youth. One would think it was easy enough, there was the same kind of feathers to be had, and yet somehow, till this last night, she did not know when she had had a good sound resting sleep. Mr. Hale suggested that something of the merits of the feather beds of former days might be attributed to the activity of youth, which gave a relish to rest. But this idea was not kindly received by his wife.
No, indeed, Mr. Hale. It was those beds at Sir John's. Now, Margaret, you're young enough and go about in the day. Are the beds comfortable? I appeal to you. Do they give you a feeling of perfect repose when you lie down upon them, or rather, don't you toss about and try in vain to find an easy position, and waken in the morning as tired as when you went to bed?
Margaret laughed.
To tell the truth, Mamma, I've never thought about my bed at all, what kind it is. I'm so sleepy at night that if I only lie down anywhere, I nap off directly. So I don't think I am a competent witness. But then, you know, I never had the opportunity of trying Sir John Beresford's beds. I never was at Oxenham. Were not you? Oh, no, to be sure. It was poor darling Fred I took with me. I remember. I only went to Oxenham once after I was married, to your Aunt Shaw's wedding, and poor little Fred was the baby then. And I know Dixon did not like changing from lady's maid to nurse, and I was afraid that if I took her near her old home and amongst her own people, she might want to leave me. But poor baby was taken ill at Oxenham with his teething, and what with my being a great deal with Anna just before her marriage, and not being very strong myself, Dixon had more of the charge of him than she ever had before, and it made her so fond of him, and she was so proud when he would turn away from everyone and cling to her, that I don't believe she ever thought of leaving me again, though it was very different from what she'd been accustomed to. Poor Fred. Everybody loved him. He was born with the gift of winning hearts. It makes me think very badly of Captain Reed when I know that he disliked my own dear boy. I think it a certain proof he had a bad heart. Ah, your poor father, Margaret. He has left the room. He can't bear to hear Fred spoken of. I love to hear about him, Mamma. Tell me all you like. You never can tell me too much. Tell me what he was like as a baby. Why, Margaret, you must not be hurt, but he was much prettier than you. I remember when I first saw you in Dixon's arms, I said, "Dear, what an ugly little thing." And she said, "It's not every child that's like Master Fred, bless him." Dear, how well I remember it. Then I could have had Fred in my arms every minute of the day, and his cot was close by my bed, and now, Margaret, I don't know where my boy is, and sometimes I think I shall never see him again. Margaret sat down by her mother's sofa on a little stool and softly took hold of her hand, caressing it and kissing it as if to comfort. Mrs. Hale cried without restraint. At last she sat straight, stiff up on the sofa, and turning round to her daughter, she said with tearful, almost solemn earnestness, "Margaret, if I can get better, if God lets me have a chance of recovery, it must be through seeing my son Frederick once more. It will waken up all the poor springs of health left in me." She paused and seemed to try and gather strength for something more yet to be said. Her voice was choked as she went on, was quavering as with the contemplation of some strange yet closely present idea. "And, Margaret, if I am to die, if I am one of those appointed to die before many weeks are over, I must see my child first. I cannot think how it must be managed, but I charge you, Margaret, as you yourself hope for comfort in your last illness. Bring him to me that I may bless him. Only for 5 minutes, Margaret. There could be no danger in 5 minutes. Oh, Margaret, let me see him before I die." Margaret did not think of anything that might be utterly unreasonable in this speech. We do not look for reason or logic in the passionate entreaties of those who are sick unto death. We are stung with the recollection of 1,000 slighted opportunities of fulfilling the wishes of those who will soon pass away from among us. And do they ask us for the future happiness of our lives, we lay it at their feet and will it away from us. But this wish of Mrs. Hale's was so natural, so just, so right to both parties, that Margaret felt as if, on Frederick's account as well as on her mother's, she ought to overlook all intermediate chances of danger and pledge herself to do everything in her power for its realization. The large, pleading, dilated eyes were fixed upon her wistfully, steady in their gaze, though the poor white lips quivered like those of a child. Margaret gently rose up and stood opposite to her frail mother, so that she might gather the secure fulfillment of her wish from the calm steadiness of her daughter's face. "Mamma, I will write tonight and tell Frederick what you say. I am as sure that he will come directly to us as I am sure of my life. Be easy, Mamma. You shall see him as far as anything earthly can be promised." "You will write tonight? Oh, Margaret, the post goes out at 5. You will write by it, won't you? I have so few hours left. I feel, dear, as if I should not recover, though sometimes your father over-persuades me into hoping. You will write directly, won't you? Don't lose a single post, for just by that very post I may miss him." "But, Mamma, Papa is out." "Papa is out? And what then? Do you mean that he would deny me this last wish, Margaret? Why, I should not be ill, be dying, if he had not taken me away from Helston to this unhealthy, smoky, sunless place." "Oh, mamma," said Margaret. "Yes, it is so indeed. He knows it himself. He has said so many a time. He would do anything for me. You don't mean he would refuse me this last wish, prayer, if you will. And indeed, Margaret, the longing to see Frederick stands between me and God. I cannot pray till I have this one thing. Indeed, I cannot. Don't lose time, dear, dear Margaret. Write by this very next post. Then he may be here in 22 days, for he is sure to come. No cords or chains can keep him. In 22 days I shall see my boy." She fell back, and for a short time she took no notice of the fact that Margaret sat motionless, her hand shading her eyes. "You are not writing," said her mother at last. "Bring me some pens and paper. I will try and write myself." She sat up, trembling all over with feverish eagerness. Margaret took her hand down and looked at her mother sadly. "Only wait till Papa comes in. Let us ask him how best to do it." "You promised, Margaret, not a quarter of an hour ago. You said he should come." "And so he shall, mamma. Don't cry, my own dear mother. I'll write here now. You shall see me write, and it shall go by this very post. And if Papa thinks fit, he can write again when he comes in. It is only a day's delay. Oh, mamma, don't cry so pitifully. It cuts me to the heart." Mrs. Hale could not stop her tears. They came hysterically, and, in truth, she made no effort to control them, but rather called up all the pictures of the happy past and the probable future, painting the scene when she should lie a corpse, with the son she had longed to see in life weeping over her, and she unconscious of his presence, till she was melted by self-pity into a state of sobbing and exhaustion that made Margaret's heart ache. But at last she was calm, and greedily watched her daughter as she began her letter, wrote it with swift, urgent entreaty, sealed it up hurriedly for fear her mother should ask to see it, and then, to make security most sure, at Mrs. Hale's own bidding, took it herself to the post office. She was coming home when her father overtook her. "And where have you been, my pretty maid?" asked he. "To the post office, with a letter to Frederick. Oh, Papa, perhaps I have done wrong, but Mamma was seized with such a passionate yearning to see him. She said it would make her well again, and then she said that she must see him before she died. I cannot tell you how urgent she was. Did I do wrong?" Mr. Hale did not reply at first. Then he said, "You should have waited till I came in, Margaret." "I tried to persuade her." And then she was silent. "I don't know," said Mr. Hale after a pause. "She ought to see him if she wishes it so much, for I believe it would do her much more good than all the doctor's medicine, and perhaps set her up altogether, but the danger to him, I'm afraid, is very great." "All these years since the mutiny, Papa?" "Yes, it is necessary, of course, for government to take very stringent measures for the repression of offences against authority, more particularly in the Navy, where a commanding officer needs to be surrounded in his men's eyes with a vivid consciousness of all the power there is at home to back him and take up his cause and avenge any injuries offered to him if need be. Ah, it's no matter to them how far their authorities have tyrannized, galled hasty tempers to madness, or if that can be any excuse afterwards. It is never allowed for in the first instance. They spare no expense. They send out ships, they scour the seas to lay hold of the offenders.
The lapse of years does not wash out the memory of the offence. It is a fresh and vivid crime on the Admiralty books till it is blotted out by blood.
Oh, Papa, what have I done? And yet it seemed so right at the time. I'm sure Frederick himself would run the risk.
So he would. So he should. Nay, Margaret, I am glad it is done, though I durst not have done it myself. I am thankful it is as it is. I should have hesitated till perhaps it might have been too late to do any good. Dear Margaret, you have done what is right about it, and the end is beyond our control.
It was all very well, but her father's account of the relentless manner in which mutinies were punished made Margaret shiver and creep. If she had decoyed her brother home to blot out the memory of his error by his blood, she saw her father's anxiety lay deeper than the source of his latter cheering words. She took his arm and walked home pensively and wearily by his side.
Oh dear, Frederick's gonna come back, and it's kind of dangerous for him to do that. So I think this last little scene between Margaret and Mr. Hale, when Margaret has divulged to her father what she and her mother have been up to, and of course Margaret was really more than a little resistant, but her mother was also really more than a little dying last wish-ish, and so she's stuck. And remember that Margaret's family never really talked to her about what happened with Frederick. She didn't really know what was up or the whole story or anything, so it is very likely that she didn't entirely understand the length of the ire of the British Navy. And I think that the way Mr. Hale talks about the problem when he's talking to Margaret in this last scene is a fascinating look into Elizabeth Gaskell's brain. This has been referred to as a Condition of England book, which was a particular style of book. I think Carlyle came up with this phrase at the midpoint of the Victorian era, where it was a novel, so fiction, that examined some of the social problems, societal problems, political problems that were ascendant at that time in British society. There were plenty of them, but not all of them were as good as North and South. But I think that this is why Gaskell must have taken such enormous pains to give us Higgins on the one side, and even Boucher, and Thornton on the other side, and then some of the other manufacturers who don't behave quite as well as Thornton does in business. And then here we have Mr. Hale and we have Margaret, who give us kind of a religious side of things. But then we also have Hale doing this really interesting dance here, where at the beginning of his speech to Margaret, he's really defending the Navy. Well, you know, they really have to defend against mutiny and they have to prosecute, and so it's understandable. But then as he starts to remember the personal attachment that he has to this particular story, his son, then he starts to question the lengths to which the Navy will go to preserve its autonomy and strength, and or the perception of its strength, and he starts to, in effect, give us the other side of the coin, the other side of the story. And that is something that Gaskell does, and I personally think she does a remarkable job of really presenting both sides very strongly and convincingly for almost all of the arguments that she presents at some point in the novel, whether they are religious or political or societal or social. Part of the curriculum that I've been working on is actually helping teachers understand how to teach argument writing, where you have a claim and you have to have evidence and you have to support your claim. And I tend to use the scene from Thank You for Smoking, where the main character is talking to his son about chocolate and vanilla ice cream. And I will put a link to this in the show notes in case you've never seen the scene, because it is marvelous, and it leaves you with kind of an empty hole in your stomach because you think, oh, that's really not so good. And that kind of seems to be what's happening a lot in politics these days. And oh my goodness, I think we'd better teach our children how to think logically a little more than we have been doing. And so for me, when I'm looking at a moment like this in a fiction text where a character or a pair of characters are presenting two sides of an argument, I'm impressed, because conceding to the opposing point of view, or accepting that there even is an opposing point of view, is not something we tend to see in American politics these days. And furthermore, not only to concede to the opposition, but to actually be able to understand and put voice to the cause of the opposition is really, really quite something. And Gaskell's going to continue to do that all the way through this book. Now, this chapter today was the end of volume 1. Yes, there are 2 volumes. And next week we'll begin volume 2. And so we've got this a bit of a cliffhanger here, because now, oh my goodness, Frederick's going to come back. And that's the end of what was in the serial that Charles Dickens published in Household Words. And they had to wait for the next part of the magazine to come out. And to that effect, I have a little more audio of Larry Uffelman, our Professor Emeritus of Victorian Literature, and me speaking by phone a few months ago, actually. And I think I have managed to cut out all of the possible spoilers. But we talk a little bit about Dickens and Gaskell and the difficulties that they had. And then we go into some other parts of the story. And I am going to let that audio play us out once again. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Here's Larry.
When Dickens and Gaskell were negotiating for the publication of this book in his weekly periodical, Gaskell was thinking of the work as the title of the book as either Margaret or Margaret Hale. She saw it as a story about Margaret's development. Dickens gave it the title North and South because he saw it as a novel about conflict between the manufacturing North and the more aristocratic South. So that Dickens and Gaskell didn't really seem to agree on the focus of what this novel would be.
Interesting.
Gaskell saw it as developing a gradual change in Margaret, whereas Dickens saw it in terms of conflict between classes.
Right.
And when it was published in his weekly periodical Household Words, Dickens essentially treated Mrs. Gaskell a little shabbily. He published his novel, Hard Times, and she had asked him if he was going to have a strike in that novel, and he said no, he wasn't. Well, then she felt free to put a strike in her novel. But then, voila, Hard Times was published, and guess what? There was a strike in it. And she was really angry.
I'll bet.
Because she felt betrayed. And then he got angry because he was publishing a weekly, which had relatively few pages, and her stories were too long to fit easily into those week after week. And he just wanted her finally to finish the bleeding novel and get on with the rest of her life. And she felt betrayed and badly used.
Right.
And she never published another novel with him. After that, she published some short stuff, but no more novels with him, because she found that writing for a weekly publication was just too much of a pressure cooker, and she didn't do it well. But basically, the misunderstanding between them is what the focus of the story is. For Dickens, it was the economic and cultural division between two parts of the country. And for Gaskell, the novel was about the developing character of Margaret Hale, and you can't have it both ways. So the reason for the real blow up between Dickens and Gaskell during the publication of this novel in periodical form is basic misunderstanding of what the novel was about.
Do you know if any of the reviewers suffered the same disconnect between where Gaskell thought she was going with the book and where?
No, not so much. And if they did, it was merely a passing comment. It was a source of disagreement between Gaskell and Dickens that lasted for the rest of their lives, really.
Well, I'm shocked, of course, simply shocked that Dickens could be unpleasant.
Well, I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, he was a great writer and a great editor.
Yeah.
And he brought a lot of writers who otherwise would have had no place to publish into the literary mainstream. But he didn't understand that Gaskell didn't work well in weekly serials until it was too late. And by then, the kind of rupture in their relationship was not entirely healable. Yeah. Even though she continued to publish shorter things with him, she never again gave him a major piece.
Was this her first serialized novel, serialized with Dickens?
Yes, I believe it was. Her first serialized novel. She had published other things with him. That's why he wanted her.
Right.
He wanted her to do a novel. But what he didn't understand, nor did she, was that the pressure of weekly publication worked against her own creative impulses.
I am baffled by people who can do these things. They do them on blogs where every week is a new chapter of a book. I don't know how Dickens did it. Going through Bleak House right now on the podcast, I'm absolutely mind blown at what he was able to pull off, especially with that book.
Yeah.
Do you know what the thinking was behind what comes across as blank sure when you have a blank line and then sure? So instead of Wiltshire, it's
in a way when she uses those blank sheer and it shires and it's clear that she's talking about the South. It doesn't make much difference which one it is. Right. She's talking about an agriculturally oriented part of the country, which is where the seat of power is, where the money is, where the political power is, where the church is, where the Archbishop of Canterbury is located. All of that, all the power is in the South, and the ones on whom the power is exercised in her novels are in the North.
And it surprised me so much. Well, I found the opening chapters of this particular book to be a lot more difficult to figure out, framing it as an instructor, as a teacher, to look at this book and you go, okay, well, other hard books, The Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter, you have a 2-page opening chapter where Hawthorne lays out all of his symbols. And he just says, here they are. These are the symbols. This is what the tone of the book is going to be. And everything will fit into this nice, neat little symbolic box. And you go, okay, well, as long as you can communicate that to the kids and get them interested in finding out how those symbols work, it's fine. And Jane Eyre starts with kids fighting, which is always fun. And so that's easy and an easy sell. But this book, you've got Margaret's cousin, who seems to be a bit of a twit. And then the Captain Lennox shows up, and he seems to be a little too proud of his little twit. And so they're both kind of disgusting. And then the captain's brother engages in this conversation with Margaret where he starts trying to draw her out and get her to talk about Halston. And she keeps stopping him and kind of pushing him away and saying, oh, I can't explain what that's like. Oh, you can't have me explain my home. I can't explain my home. It's just my home. And I thought, what a curious way to start a book, because your heroine is kind of off-putting and troublesome, and she's not easy. And then I thought, well, actually, for a modern audience, if I point that out, that might not be such a bad thing. But I thought it was an interesting way for Gaskell to open the book. It seemed so different to me from, even you get Elizabeth Bennet, and the first chapter is really about how ridiculous Elizabeth Bennet's mom is and how great her dad is. And so that gives you a kind of a clear paradigm for what the rest of the book is going to be like. But this one I found, it was a very curious opening for me.
Sometimes I suppose Gaskell's novels can be a little slow going at the beginning. I'm just opening the copy of the thing to chapter 1 to see. Edith, said Margaret gently. Edith. But Edith had fallen asleep. She was curled up on the sofa in the back drawing room, looking very lovely in her white muslin and blue ribbons. Well, yeah. I mean, Gaskell is setting this up. This is what life is like in this place, and this is what she's going to turn against. So you get at first the kind of dull sleepiness of where she's coming from, and then you move pretty quickly after that to Milton, where she comes into a kind of dark house with crappy wallpaper and people who don't talk right and who are apparently rude. And
it's loud and dirty.
Loud and forthright and dirty, and the air isn't fit to breathe, and the streets aren't clean. And it sets up the contrast that Gaskell is going to make.
Like CraftLit? Leave us a review on iTunes, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, repin our pins on Pinterest, or post a link to us when you comment on literary blogs. You can listen via Stitcher Radio, craftlit.com, iTunes, or via the Android, Windows 8, or iOS app. You can also use this free CraftLit app to access premium subscriber content. CraftLit is and has been made possible by the generous support of its listeners, and for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on. 348, chapters 26 and 27.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion.
Episode 348, Down to the Wire. Well, hello. Yes, Down to the Wire. I love it when time and circumstance make such a perfect title for a podcast episode. We are getting down to the wire in the living in Sparta world. There are only a few more weeks left until the end of June, at which point the boys and I will load up the U-Haul and get out of Dodge, which is great. A lot of things have to happen before that point, though, but that's fine, too. But the other thing that's down to the wire is, I am often a little late to the party. In this case, I'm like 11 years late to the party, but we didn't have HBO when The Wire was on. And now we do have Amazon Prime. And my husband, what with him being all alone up in Pennsylvania, started watching The Wire. And then when he came to visit, he showed me The Wire. And now I am like a junkie. It's horrible. It's exactly what happened with Breaking Bad. I know. It's, an addictive personality thing, I'm sure. Let's just be happy that one of the things I'm addicted to is podcasting. But oh my gosh, the writing on this thing, if you are not bothered by a lot of swearing and cursing, then you'll be fine, because the writing and the storytelling is fascinatingly done. The people are so complicated. People who you really, really do not like, all of a sudden, they do something really nice or smart or kind or generous. And that makes you stop and go, So there's The Wire, and there's the move. And then there's the fact that once the move happens, I must have come up with a new tagline for the opening of the show. We started in Croton-on-Hudson, on the shores of the Hudson River. in the charming village of Croton-on-Hudson. And then we went to the Old Pueblo. And now we're on the banks of the Potomac. And now I'm about to move to New Hope, Pennsylvania, on the shores of the Delaware. But, I'm not sure. There's Washington's Crossing, or Washington Crossing, which is just a little bit south of us. And it is actually, I know, I was shocked, the place where Washington crossed the Delaware. I don't know if that should be in the title. I don't know. I haven't come up with a solution yet. But New Hope, Pennsylvania is across the river from Lambertville, New Jersey. And I know New Jersey has a lot of jokes made about it, but Lambertville is really awesomely beautiful and on the Delaware River, which, it's pretty. It's really pretty right there. So, along with the other stuff that I'm working on, I'm coming up with the tagline. So, book talk. I am so excited by today's chapters. We have 2, and they are the first 2 of the second volume. So they're volume 2, chapters 1 and 2, or chapter 26 and 27, depending on which version of the book you actually have. And today's chapters are actually kind of exciting because there are actual textiles in them. It's like, woo! Here we are. At last. But we start today with poor Mr. Thornton, who is kind of behaving like a stubborn teenage boy. And it's kind of adorable. And of course, it's terribly heartbreaking. And as he goes off and has his way of dealing with everything, his mother, you may recall, is sitting at home assuming that he and Margaret are getting married. So she is preparing for that adventure. And really, it's a lovely scene because she goes through a whole bunch of activities to try and pass the time, but also kind of to deal with what's about to happen, she thinks. And I had actually recorded a whole bunch of information about what Mrs. Thornton is doing while she is waiting to see John. And then I realized it would kind of spoil things for you because there's nothing that she's going to do or say that you really need to know about in advance, but there's a lot of stuff you'll find is really cool after. So I have gone through and edited and tried to take out all the future tense and put in past tense, but I don't know if I caught it all. So if I didn't, please forgive my tense switching. All right, well, without spending any more time talking about it, I am going to turn you over to our reader so we can listen to chapters 26 and 27 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 26. Mother and Son. I have found that holy place of rest still changeless. Mrs. Hemans. When Mr. Thornton had left the house that morning, he was almost blinded by his baffled passion. He was as dizzy as if Margaret, instead of looking and speaking and moving like a tender, graceful woman, had been a sturdy fishwife and given him a sound blow with her fists. He had positive bodily pain, a violent headache, and a throbbing, intermittent pulse. He could not bear the noise, the garish light, the continued rumble and movement of the street. He called himself a fool for suffering so, and yet he could not, at the moment, recollect the cause of his suffering and whether it was adequate to the consequences it had produced. It would have been a relief to him if he could have sat down and cried on a doorstep by a little child who was raging and storming through his passionate tears at some injury he had received. He said to himself that he hated Margaret, but a wild, sharp sensation of love cleft his dull, thunderous feeling like lightning, even as he shaped the words expressive of hatred. His greatest comfort was in hugging his torment, and in feeling, as he had indeed said to her, that though she might despise him, condemn him, treat him with her proud sovereign indifference, he did not change one whit. She could not make him change. He loved her, and would love her, and defy her, and this miserable bodily pain. He stood still for a moment to make this resolution firm and clear. There was an omnibus passing, going into the country. The conductor thought he was wishing for a place and stopped near the pavement. It was too much trouble to apologize and explain, so he mounted upon it and was borne away, past long rows of houses, then past detached villas with trim gardens, till they came to real country hedgerows, and, by, to a small country town. Then everybody got down, and so did Mr. Thornton, and because they walked away, he did so too. He went into the fields, walking briskly, because the sharp motion relieved his mind. He could remember all about it now, the pitiful figure he must have cut, the absurd way in which he had gone and done the very thing he had so often agreed with himself in thinking would be the most foolish thing in the world, and had met with exactly the consequences which, in these wise moods, he had always foretold were certain to follow if he ever did make such a fool of himself. Was he bewitched by those beautiful eyes, that soft, half-opened, sighing mouth which lay so close upon his shoulder only yesterday? He could not even shake off the recollection that she had been there, that her arms had been round him once, if never again. He only caught glimpses of her. He did not understand her altogether. At one time she was so brave, and at another so timid, now so tender, and then so haughty and regal proud. And then he thought over every time he had ever seen her once again, by way of finally forgetting her. He saw her in every dress, in every mood, and did not know which became her best. Even this morning, how magnificent she had looked, her eyes flashing out upon him at the idea that, because she had shared his danger yesterday, she had cared for him in the least. If Mr. Thornton was a fool in the morning, as he assured himself at least 20 times he was, he did not grow much wiser in the afternoon. All that he gained in return for his 6-penny omnibus ride was a more vivid conviction that there never was, never could be, anyone like Margaret. That she did not love him and never would, but that she, no, nor the whole world, should never hinder him from loving her. And so he returned to the little marketplace and remounted the omnibus to return to Milton. It was late in the afternoon when he was set down near his warehouse. The accustomed places brought back the accustomed habits and trains of thought. He knew how much he had to do, more than his usual work owing to the commotion of the day before. He had to see his brother magistrates. He had to complete the arrangements, only half made in the morning, for the comfort and safety of his newly imported Irish hands. He had to secure them from all chance of communication with the discontented workpeople of Milton. Last of all, he had to go home and encounter his mother. Mrs. Thornton had sat in the drawing-room all day, every moment expecting the news of her son's acceptance by Miss Hale. She had braced herself up many and many a time at some sudden noise in the house, had caught up the half-dropped work and begun to ply her needle diligently, though through dimmed spectacles and with an unsteady hand. And many times had the door opened and some indifferent person entered on some insignificant errand. Then her rigid face unstiffened from its grey, frost-bound expression, and the features dropped into the relaxed look of despondency, so unusual to their sternness. She wrenched herself away from the contemplation of all the dreary changes that would be brought about to herself by her son's marriage. She forced her thoughts into the accustomed household grooves. The newly married couple-to-be would need fresh household stocks of linen. And Mrs. Thornton had clothes basket upon clothes basket full of tablecloths and napkins brought in, and began to reckon up the store. There was some confusion between what was hers and consequently marked G.H.T. for George and Hannah Thornton, and what was her son's, bought with his money, marked with his initials. Some of those marked G.H.T. were Dutch damask of the old kind, exquisitely fine. None were like them now. Mrs. Thornton stood looking at them long. They had been her pride when she was first married. Then she knit her brows and pinched and compressed her lips tight and carefully unpicked the G.H. She went so far as to search for the turkey-red marking thread to put in the new initials, but it was all used, and she had no heart to send for any more just yet. So she looked fixedly at vacancy, a series of visions passing before her, in all of which her son was the principal, the sole object. Her son, her pride, her property. Still he did not come. Doubtless he was with Miss Hale. The new love was displacing her already from her place as first in his heart. A terrible pain, a pang of vain jealousy shot through her. She hardly knew whether it was more physical or mental, but it forced her to sit down. In a moment she was up again as straight as ever, a grim smile upon her face for the first time that day, ready for the door opening and the rejoicing triumphant one who should never know the sore regret his mother felt at his marriage. In all this, there was little thought enough of the future daughter-in-law as an individual. She was to be John's wife. To take Mrs. Thornton's place as mistress of the house was only one of the rich consequences which decked out the supreme glory. All household plenty and comfort, all purple and fine linen, honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, would all come as naturally as jewels on a king's robe and be as little thought of for their separate value. To be chosen by John would separate a kitchen wench from the rest of the world. And Miss Hale was not so bad. If she had been a Milton lass, Mrs. Thornton would have positively liked her. She was pungent, and had taste and spirit and flavour in her. True, she was sadly prejudiced, and very ignorant, but that was to be expected from her southern breeding. A strange sort of mortified comparison of Fanny with her went on in Mrs. Thornton's mind, and for once she spoke harshly to her daughter, abused her roundly, and then, as if by way of penance, she took up Henry's commentaries and tried to fix her attention on it, instead of pursuing the employment she took pride and pleasure in and continuing her inspection of the table linen. His step at last. She heard him, even while she thought she was finishing a sentence. While her eye did pass over it, and her memory could mechanically have repeated it word for word, she heard him come in at the hall door. Her quickened sense could interpret every sound of motion. Now he was at the hat-stand, now at the very room door. Why did he pause? Let her know the worst. Yet her head was down over the book. She did not look up. He came close to the table and stood still there, waiting till she should have finished the paragraph which apparently absorbed her. By an effort she looked up. "Well, John?" He knew what that little speech meant, but he had steeled himself. He longed to reply with a jest. The bitterness of his heart could have uttered one, but his mother deserved better of him. He came round behind her so that she could not see his looks, and bending back her grey, stony face, he kissed it, murmuring, "No one loves me, no one cares for me but you, mother." He turned away and stood leaning his head against the mantelpiece, tears forcing themselves into his manly eyes. She stood up. She tottered. For the first time in her life, the strong woman tottered. She put her hands on his shoulders. She was a tall woman. She looked into his face. She made him look at her. Mother's love is given by God, John. It holds fast forever and ever. A girl's love is like a puff of smoke. It changes with every wind. And she would not have you, my own lad, would not she? She set her teeth. She showed them like a dog for the whole length of her mouth. He shook his head. I am not fit for her, mother. I knew I was not. She ground out words between her closed teeth. He could not hear what she said, but the look in her eyes interpreted it to be a curse, if not as coarsely worded, as fell in intent as ever was uttered. And yet her heart leapt up light to know he was her own again. Mother, said he hurriedly, I cannot hear a word against her. Spare me, spare me. I am very weak in my sore heart. I love her yet. I love her more than ever. And I hate her, said Mrs. Thornton in a low, fierce voice. I tried not to hate her when she stood between you and me, because I said to myself, she will make him happy, and I would give my heart's blood to do that. But now, I hate her for your misery's sake. Yes, John, it's no use hiding up your aching heart from me. I am the mother that bore you, and your sorrow is my agony, and if you don't hate her, I do. Then, mother, you make me love her more. She is unjustly treated by you, and I must make the balance even. But why do we talk of love or hatred? She does not care for me, and that is enough, too much. Let us never name the subject again. It is the only thing you can do for me in the matter. Let us never name her. With all my heart, I only wish that she and all belonging to her were swept back to the place they came from. He stood still, gazing into the fire for a minute or two longer. Her dry, dim eyes filled with unwanted tears as she looked at him, but she seemed just as grim and quiet as usual when he next spoke. Warrants are out against 3 men for conspiracy, mother. The riot yesterday helped to knock up the strike. And Margaret's name was no more mentioned between Mrs. Thornton and her son. They fell back into their usual mode of talk, about facts, not opinions, far less feelings. Their voices and tones were calm and cold. A stranger might have gone away and thought that he had never seen such frigid indifference of demeanor between such near relations. Chapter 27. Fruit Piece. For never anything can be amiss when simpleness and duty tender it. Midsummer Night's Dream. Mr. Thornton went straight and clear into all the interests of the following day. There was a slight demand for finished goods, and as it affected his branch of the trade, he took advantage of it and drove hard bargains. He was sharp to the hour at the meeting of his brother magistrates, giving them the best assistance of his strong sense and his power of seeing consequences at a glance, and so coming to a rapid decision. Older men, men of long standing in the town, men of far greater wealth, realized and turned into land, while his was all floating capital, engaged in his trade, looked to him for prompt, ready wisdom. He was the one deputed to see and arrange with the police, to lead in all the requisite steps, and he cared for their unconscious deference no more than for the soft west wind that scarcely made the smoke from the great tall chimneys swerve in its straight upward course. He was not aware of the silent respect paid to him. If it had been otherwise, he would have felt it as an obstacle in his progress to the object he had in view. As it was, he looked to the speedy accomplishment of that alone. It was his mother's greedy ears that sucked in from the womenkind of these magistrates and wealthy men how highly Mr. This or Mr. That thought of Mr. Thornton, that if he had not been there things would have gone on very differently, very badly indeed. He swept off his business right and left that day. It seemed as though his deep mortification of yesterday and the stunned, purposeless course of the hours afterwards had cleared away all the mists from his intellect. He felt his power and reveled in it. He could almost defy his heart. If he had known it, he could have sang the song of the miller who lived by the River Dee. I care for nobody, nobody cares for me. The evidence against Boucher and other ringleaders of the riot was taken before him. That against the 3 others for conspiracy failed, but he sternly charged the police to be on the watch, for the swift right arm of the law should be in readiness to strike as soon as they could prove a fault. And then he left the hot, reeking room in the borough court and went out into the fresher but still sultry street. It seemed as though he gave way all at once. He was so languid that he could not control his thoughts. They would wander to her. They would bring back the scene, not of his repulse and rejection the day before, but the looks, the actions of the day before that. He went along the crowded streets mechanically, winding in and out among the people, but never seeing them. Almost sick with longing for that 1/2 hour, that one brief space of time when she clung to him and her heart beat against his, to come once again. "Well, Mr. Thornton, you're cutting me very coolly, I must say. And how is Mrs. Thornton? Brave weather this. We doctors don't like it, I can tell you." "I beg your pardon, Dr. Donaldson. I really didn't see you. My mother's quite well, thank you. It is a fine day, and good for the harvest, I hope. If the wheat is well got in, we shall have a brisk trade next year, whatever you doctors have." Aye, each man for himself. Your bad weather and your bad times are my good ones. When trade is bad, there's more undermining of health and preparation for death going on among you Milton men than you're aware of. Not with me, Doctor. I'm made of iron. The news of the worst bad debt I ever had never made my pulse vary. This strike, which affects me more than anyone else in Milton, more than Amper, never comes near my appetite. You must go elsewhere for a patient, Doctor. By the way, you recommended me a good patient, poor lady. Not to go on talking in this heartless way, I seriously believe that Mrs. Hale, that lady in Crampton, you know, hasn't many weeks to live. I never had any hope of a cure, as I think I told you, but I've been seeing her today, and I think very badly of her." Mr. Thornton was silent. The vaunted steadiness of pulse failed him for an instant. "Can I do anything, Doctor?" he asked in an altered voice. "You know, you would see that money is not very plentiful. Are there any comforts or dainties she ought to have?" "No," replied the doctor, shaking his head. "She craves for fruit. She has a constant fever on her, but jargonelle pears will do as well as anything, and there are quantities of them in the market." "You will tell me if there is anything I can do, I'm sure," replied Mr. Thornton. "I rely upon you." "Oh, never fear. I'll not spare your purse. I know it's deep enough. I wish you'd give me carte blanche for all my patients and all their wants." But Mr. Thornton had no general benevolence, no universal philanthropy. Few even would have given him credit for strong affections. But he went straight to the first fruit shop in Milton and chose out the bunch of purple grapes with the most delicate bloom upon them, the richest colored peaches, the freshest vine leaves. They were packed into a basket, and the shopman awaited the answer to his inquiry. "Where shall we send them to, sir?" There was no reply. "To Marlborough Mills, I suppose, sir?" "No," Mr. Thornton said. "Give the basket to me. I'll take it." It took up both his hands to carry it, and he had to pass through the busiest part of the town for feminine shopping. Many a young lady of his acquaintance turned to look after him and thought it strange to see him occupied just like a porter or errand boy. He was thinking, "I will not be daunted from doing as I choose by the thought of her. I like to take this fruit to the poor mother, and it is simply right that I should. She shall never scorn me out of doing what I please. A pretty joke indeed, if, for fear of a haughty girl, I failed in doing a kindness to a man I like. I'd do it for Mr. Ale. I'd do it in defiance of her."
He went at an unusual pace, and was soon at Crampton. He went upstairs 2 steps at a time, and entered the drawing-room before Dixon could announce him, his face flushed, his eyes shining with kindly earnestness. Mrs. Hale lay on the sofa, heated with fever. Mr. Hale was reading aloud. Margaret was working on a low stool by her mother's side. Her heart fluttered if his did not at this interview. But he took no notice of her, hardly of Mr. Hale himself. He went up straight with his basket to Mrs. Hale, and said, in that subdued and gentle tone which is so touching when used by a robust man in full health speaking to a feeble invalid,
"I met Dr. Donaldson, ma'am, and as he said fruit would be good for you, I have taken the liberty, the great liberty, of bringing you some that seemed to me fine."
Mrs. Hale was excessively surprised, excessively pleased, quite in a tremble of eagerness. Mr. Hale, with fewer words, expressed a deeper gratitude.
"Fetch a plate, Margaret. A basket, anything."
Margaret stood up by the table, half afraid of moving or making any noise to arouse Mr. Thornton into a consciousness of her being in the room. She thought it would be awkward for both to be brought into conscious collision, and fancied that, from her being on a low seat at first, and now standing behind her father, he had overlooked her in his haste. As if he did not feel the consciousness of her presence all over, though his eyes had never rested on her.
"I must go," said he. "I cannot stay. If you will forgive this liberty, my rough ways, too abrupt, I fear, but I will be more gentle the next time. You will allow me the pleasure of bringing you some fruit again, if I should see any that is tempting. Good afternoon, Mr. Ale. Goodbye, ma'am."
He was gone. Not one word, not one look to Margaret. She believed that he had not seen her. She went for a plate in silence, and lifted the fruit out tenderly with the points of her delicate taper fingers. It was good of him to bring it, and after yesterday, too. "Oh, it is so delicious," said Mrs. Hale in a feeble voice. "How kind of him to think of me. Margaret, love, only taste these grapes. Was it not good of him?" "Yes," said Margaret quietly. "Margaret," said Mrs. Hale rather querulously, "you won't like anything Mr. Thornton does. I never saw anybody so prejudiced." Mr. Hale had been peeling a peach for his wife, and cutting off a small piece for himself, he said,
"If I had any prejudices, the gift of such delicious fruit as this would melt them all away. I have not tasted such fruit, no, not even in Hampshire, since I was a boy, and to boys I fancy all fruit is good. I remember eating sloes and crabs with a relish. Do you remember the matted-up currant bushes, Margaret, at the corner of the west wall in the garden at home?"
Did she not? Did she not remember every weather stain on the old stone wall, the grey and yellow lichens that marked it like a map, the little crane's bill that grew in the crevices? She had been shaken by the events of the last 2 days. Her whole life just now was a strain upon her fortitude, and somehow these careless words of her father's, touching on the remembrance of the sunny times of old, made her start up, and dropping her sewing on the ground, she went hastily out of the room into her own little chamber. She had hardly given way to the first choking sob when she became aware of Dixon standing at her drawers and evidently searching for something.
"Bless me, miss, how you startled me. Missus is not worse, is she? Is anything the matter?"
"No, nothing. Only I'm silly, Dixon, and want a glass of water." What are you looking for? I keep my muslins in that drawer."
Dixon did not speak, but went on rummaging. The scent of lavender came out and perfumed the room. At last Dixon found what she wanted. What it was, Margaret could not see. Dixon faced round and spoke to her.
"Now, I don't like telling you what I wanted, because you've fretting enough to go through, and I know you'll fret about this. I meant to have kept it from you till night, maybe, or such times as that."
"What is the matter? Pray tell me, Dixon, at once."
"That young woman you go to see, Higgins, I mean."
"Well?"
"Well, she died this morning, and her sister is here, come to beg a strange thing. It seems the young woman who died had a fancy for being buried in something of yours, and so the sister's come to ask for it, and I was looking for a nightcap that wasn't too good to give away."
"Oh, let me find one," said Margaret in the midst of her tears. "Poor Bessie! I never thought I should not see her again."
"Why, that's another thing. This gal downstairs wanted me to ask you if you would like to see her."
"But she's dead," said Margaret, turning a little pale. "I never saw a dead person. No, I would rather not."
"I should never have asked you if you hadn't come in. I told her you wouldn't."
"I will go down and speak to her," said Margaret, afraid lest Dixon's harshness of manner might wound the poor girl. So, taking the cap in her hand, she went to the kitchen. Mary's face was all swollen with crying, and she burst out afresh when she saw Margaret. "Oh, ma'am, she loved you, she did indeed." And for a long time, Margaret could not get her to say anything more than this. At last, her sympathy and Dixon's scolding forced out a few facts. Nicholas Higgins had gone out in the morning, leaving Bessie as well as on the day before. But in an hour she was taken worse. Some neighbor ran to the room where Mary was working. They did not know where to find her father. Mary had only come in a few minutes before she died. "It were a day or two ago she asked to be buried in somewhat o' yourn. She were never tired o' talking o' you. She used to say you were the prettiest thing she'd ever clapped eyes on. She loved you dearly. Her last words were, 'Give her my affectionate respects and keep father from drink.' You'll come and see her, ma'am. She would have thought it a great compliment, I know." Margaret shrank a little from answering. "Yes, perhaps I may. Yes, I will. I'll come before tea. But where's your father, Mary?" Mary shook her head and stood up to be going.
"Miss Hale," said Dixon in a low voice, "where's the use of your going to see the poor thing laid out? I'd never say a word against it, if it could do the girl any good, and I wouldn't mind a bit going myself if that would satisfy her. They've just a notion, these common folk, of its being a respect to the departed. Here," she said, turning sharply round, "I'll come and see your sister. Miss Hale is busy, and she can't come, or else she would."
The girl looked wistfully at Margaret. Dixon's coming might be a compliment, but it was not the same thing to the poor sister, who had had her little pangs of jealousy during Bessie's lifetime at the intimacy between her and the young lady. "No, Dixon," said Margaret with decision. "I will go. Mary, you shall see me this afternoon." And for fear of her own cowardice she went away, in order to take from herself any chance of changing her determination.
So there was some fruit. There was some fruit discussed in this chapter, and I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned a few of them because I think Americans are probably not familiar with any of them. Mr. Hale talks about sloes and crabs. Sloes are the berries, the sloe berries from the sloe bush, which sloe gin is made from, and crabs are crab apples. And both of them are rather tart. And I think on the podcast 1,000 years ago, I mentioned a recipe that I got from Brenda Dane over at Cast On for crabapple jelly and cheese. And we don't have access to crab apples here in the States. So I have been using the tartest apples I could find, and that seems to work fine. I don't know if it compares to the original. I imagine it doesn't completely, but it's pretty good, and we like it. So there's that. But then there was another thing that got mentioned. The Jargonelle pears. These are pears that ripened early, and so they would have been in season before the other fruit was in season. And that was why the doctor specifically mentioned that kind of pear, not because it was, had more healing properties or anything, just because there was a better chance of it being in the store. Oh, and there was the mention of the Song of the Miller. Poor Mr. Thornton. The Song of the Miller. I care for nobody. Nobody cares for me. Well, it turns out that these are actually the last lines of the song, The Miller of D. And the full part says, "And this the burden of his song forever used to be. I care for nobody. No, not I. And nobody cares for me." And this was collected in a book called Songs for Music in 1856. So it was a folk song that people knew. It was popular. And it's the River Dee, spelled D-E-E. So that's where that came from. Right then, here is where I am inserting the section about Mrs. Thornton and her textiles and what she was up to while she was waiting for John to come home. So here we flip into that. One of the things she does is she pulls out the Dutch damask. These are her fine linen napkins and things like that. And all of them have been labeled, embroider labeled with her husband's and her name. So it's her husband's first name, her first name, and their combined last name, Thornton, which are the initials embroidered on there. She talks about Dutch damask. And she talks about how it's done in the old way and that nobody does it like that anymore. And she's so right that it is very hard to get a good picture of Dutch damask. But it was, as far as I can tell, a linen damask, and the way that it was made became kind of a thing in the early first half of the 1700s. And that, there's the Dutch East India Company, and the Amsterdam and the whole Netherlands was really a massively important trade route for quite a while. And then it started to kind of go downhill. Well, this linen trade, this industry, was part of what started to go downhill because other people figured out how to do it almost as well, but for cheaper. Which, for anyone who's been around long enough to watch economics rise and fall in countries, that this is one of those things that happens. People or one country will be an innovator and they'll come up with a way to do it, and then somebody else will come up with a way to do it cheaper. So when Mrs. Thornton is talking about Dutch damask being done in the old way, she's not joking. It's a sign of two things. Well, probably three things. One, she knows her stuff. Two, this stuff has been around for a really long time and has been really well cared for. Because if it had her husband's initials on it, it must have come from his family or her family before they were married, because of course they fell on hard times. And that means she kept it that whole time and kept it well enough that it can be used now and that people can recognize it for the quality that it is. And then the other thing is she's a thrifty woman and she hasn't gone out and bought new linens, even though she has her own factory and she could, just commandeer whatever she wanted. She hasn't, which could also indicate that they don't make damask cloth at their factory, which seems pretty apparent. But, it says a lot about her because you're going to hear her talking about re-embroidering by herself, by the way, re-embroidering all of the linens for Margaret to become a member of the family, which is both wonderful of her, but also kind of a daunting undertaking. And then you'll also hear her talking about something called turkey red thread. And this was bugging me, so I had to go look this up. It turns out that red thread, historically speaking, was very difficult to use because it would bleed. The color red was a bleedy color, as we all know. However, in Turkey, they figured out a way to make color-fast red thread, something which every housewife wanted to have access to. And so Turkey red thread was a thing. It is still a thing. You will still find people on the interwebs referring to Turkey red thread and also referring to red work in general. And it was because during this era, right exactly when we are having this book happen for us, the rise of the ability to use white cotton or white linen and decorate it with actual red, not just backstitch, but split stitch decorations in order to kind of make these little red outlines. This was a thing, and it continued to be a thing well into the 20th century. Some of the penny squares that you can still find in antique and vintage shops, those are Turkey red thread and different kinds of linen. It was a real thing. It was a big deal and pervasive, so much so that there's the Kensington School. It was a girls' school. There's a stitch called the Kensington stitch, and that was the stitch that was predominantly used by young women who were embroidering for their trousseau or for themselves or for fun or whatever. And that is where that all came from. It's all kind of interrelated, wired together, as it were. You will also hear Mrs. Thornton pick up Henry's commentaries. Now, we've had this mentioned before as a dissenter's book. And he was a Presbyterian minister, this Mr. Henry. Matthew Henry, he was born in 1662. He died young. He died in 1714. But he went through the entire Bible, all of the Old Testament, the Gospels, and I think the Acts and the Romans, I think. And he did line by line explanations. And his whole thing was kind of as a devotional. He wanted to take the line, explain the line, move along. And so it was absolutely understandable that if you were trying to pass the time, picking up Henry's commentaries would be not such a bad idea. And lest you think that we have no connection to Mr. Matthew Henry, I would like to read to you a line that you may have heard before. He said, "The woman was made of a rib out of the side of Adam, not made out of his head to rule over him, nor out of his feet to be trampled upon by him, but out of his side to be equal with him, under his arm to be protected, and near his heart to be beloved." Dude, he wrote that before he died in 1714. What a progressive thought that is. How cool. It's just, I love that. So I'm a fan of Henry now. You can find his commentaries online very easily, and I will link out to a page about him and a page of his commentaries as well if you want to check them out. And so that's all the, prickly persnickety bits, but I have a question for you. Do you remember back quite a few chapters, Margaret insinuating that Thornton, because of the way he conducted his business, wasn't really Christian, that he wasn't particularly charitable? And have you noticed in these last two chapters Thornton's behavior? Now, Gaskell has not made any direct comment about it, but I can't help feeling that, consciously or not, some of Thornton's behavior is, I guess subconsciously, trying to achieve what it was that Margaret had been critical of him about before. He goes off on the omnibus and just goes for a walk out in the nature, and he knows that that's something Margaret does, and here he goes doing it, and he helps people, and he's taking fruit to Mrs. Hale, and he's being so kind and gentle with her, and it's such a lovely scene of him ignoring Margaret entirely and being so generous of heart as well as action and pocket. And I kept thinking, I wonder if this isn't just another version of what we all go through after a painful breakup, where you try to prove that you were the right one, that you were the one that he should have stuck with or she should have stuck with. And that part of that proving is by doing the things that you used to do together, or doing the things that you think they wanted you to do. And he's just such a little teenage boy, but with very good effect. You know, he's doing good things for people. He's helping people. He's being a good businessman, which is good for his workers, but he is also caring here. And I really liked that. And it is on that happy note that I will now leave you. I hope you have a great week. I hope I have a great week too. And I will talk to you on the flip side of this filming birthday Pennsylvania weekend. I'll be back next week and bring you the next chapters. Take care. Have a great one. Bye.
You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.